Hello. I need one of those step-ups. I'm a little bit short. So thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to be here in Little Rock. This is only my second time, and every time I come here, I love it more and more. So who knows? Maybe in another lifetime. My goal is to try to shake up everything that you've heard about women and girls around the world and how they are the key to life, the universe, and everything. All our problems will go away if we invest in women and girls. Angels will sing, and all kinds of good things will happen. I'm gonna question some of those assumptions. But before I begin, I just would love to hear a little bit from you about what is on your minds about this issue. Is there some question that you've always wanted to ask, but you couldn't ask Secretary Clinton or Madeleine Albright? Is there some, doubt you have in the back of your mind that you'd love to see addressed? So let me just ask if anybody wants to shout out a few things, and if I can, I will touch on them. Any brave souls? Great question. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great question. Absolutely. What else? Yes.
Higher level positions, like women entering the workforce all around the world and getting into higher level positions, not just entry level positions.
Great. Great question. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to hear kind of about the role men can play, when men have a positive role to play and when they need to just kind of step aside and let things happen naturally.
Oh my God. 1,000 points for you. Great. What else?
I'm curious about if you could talk a little bit about how rape can affect a family and the status of the woman involved.
Okay. How much time do you have? Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else? Burning to get in? Yes, ma'am.
If you could touch upon how women are often contributors and perpetuate the cycles of violence and human trafficking. We often see women who are involved with keeping other women in those depressed situations and why that continues to happen.
Definitely. Great questions. Yes.
On the role of young girls and young women in the developing world as it relates to how menstruation and the practices around menstruation shape their schooling and their social status.
Okay, great. Sure. Okay, those are all pretty provocative questions. Anything else? Now I'm afraid to ask. Okay.
So much of the dialogue focuses on what the opportunities are for younger generations, but I'd like to hear about the role of older generations of women and how they are able to affect the changes that need to happen.
Great, thank you. I'm moving into that older woman phase, so I'm really interested in that topic more and more. Great, okay. So I will attempt to talk about all these things and weave them seamlessly together. So what I want to really start with is that women and girls really are all the rage these days. And I say that intentionally because I am concerned that they are a fad, like many other fads in the international community. Microcredit, big fad, sort of education has been a big fad. Women are not a fad. We are more than half of the population. But the current discourse around women and girls isn't addressing, I think, really fundamentally the issues that are at the root of why women and girls are so severely discriminated against and so severely set back around the world. The reason I say that is because coming out of Washington just about every week or every other week will be an announcement of a special project for women in Congo, $17 million here. $10 million for a girls' education project here, $5 million for a women's rights project over there. And those are good things, and that is real money. I think that's one strategy. But that is about 90 degrees off from the real target. There's this thing that I hear every time I travel and talk to women and women's organizations in poor communities. And what they continuously say to me is, I'm really grateful for your help and for your interest. But could you please do something about my husband? He's unemployed. He drinks. He has another family in the city. I can't divorce him. I can't leave him. So you're helping me, thank you very much, but you're creating a lot of problems for me by ignoring my husband. There is such an interesting thing about men that I like to point out also, and that is that they're everywhere. They are. And to think that we can work on women's issues and women's equality without engaging men is like saying we're going to improve children's health without engaging mothers. It doesn't make sense. And yet we do it all the time. In the conversation about women's rights these days, you don't hear talk about men. There have been some really sad and disturbing examples of this that have come from countries where the US government is spending enormous amounts of money to benefit women and girls. A very good friend of mine did some kind of off the beaten path research a couple of years ago in Afghanistan. She is an Afghani. She used to be the country director for Women International in Afghanistan, so she knows communities very well. And she surveyed about 110 families, couples, where she spoke with both the husband and the wife. She spoke to women in groups. She spoke to men in groups. And she was evaluating a US government-run micro-enterprise project in one of the provinces. And what she found, rather disturbingly, is that as a result of this project, domestic violence for the women who participated in that project had increased by 60%. That's kind of shocking, right? The whole point was to go and help women. But the reason that that project went so wrong is because we made the same mistake that we did when we left women out of projects. We left the men out of the project. And many quotes from these women were very, very powerful. You know, I came to the training, I went home, I got beaten. I can't go to the next training. I went, I got my loan, I brought it home, my husband took it, he spent it on opium, now I have to pay it back. How am I going to pay it back? You put me in a worse situation than I was in to begin with. So the solutions for women are they're not simplistic, but they are common sense. They are common sense. And as an advocate for really reforming US international aid, I find that almost every reform that I ask for really just has to do with common sense. You know, ask people what they want. Start where they are. Help them achieve their own goals. That's how you win hearts and minds. You don't win hearts and minds by giving people grain that they don't eat in bags that say from the American people, that then make their children sick because they've never digested that before. That is counterintuitive, and yet we do that all the time, all over the world. That's not how you win hearts and minds. You win hearts and minds the same way that we've always approached community development here in our own towns, like Little Rock. You start where people are. You help them achieve their own goals. So very simple, but very hard to do in large bureaucracies. So men, to answer your question, absolutely. I will not stop giving this speech until I am giving it to audiences that are half and half women and men. So I'm really happy. There's maybe 10% men here. Great. Go Little Rock. Really happy about that. But until we make the point that this is about men and women, and this is about men enjoying greater opportunities, enjoying a better quality of life. You know, it's not about taking something away from men, although we were talking over lunch that, yes, one of the biggest barriers to women's advancement is men, but it's not all men. It's maybe 5% of men who are real jerks. It's true. There are men out there who want to keep it the way that it is, and violence is the enforcement mechanism for keeping women in their place. It's a very, very effective tool for doing that. But not all men are there. There are so many more men who are good men and good advocates, and with the right investment and with the right support can be great leaders on these issues. And that's what it's going to take to change this issue. You also asked about women. Aren't women the problem? Yes, 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 yes. We are the problem. We're the solution, we're the problem. And everybody always says, well, if women ran the world, there would be no more war. And I always say, yeah, there'd still be war. It'd be all passive aggressive, though. You believe me, there would be war. You know, women, we're not angels. We're different. We're different than men, but we're not perfect. We have a different way of looking at things. We have a different leadership style. We have lots of different things. That's the point. It's good. We bring both of our assets to the table. We create something better. But women are not necessarily the solution. In many cultures, in many places, older women are invested in the status quo. The whole social structure is set up so that if they obey the rules, they have a higher social status. If your child undergoes female genital mutilation, I'm not going to say cutting, I'm going to say mutilation, because that's what it is, you have a higher status in the community. If your daughter hasn't undergone that, you're sort of ostracized. They're making a logical decision. I mean, wouldn't you? You know, it's hard to be the one that goes against the norm. So they're part of a system that's broken, and they're making rational choices within a broken system. The solution isn't to blame them. The solution is to educate them and to educate the men and challenge them to choose something different. But they're making logical decisions. And things are hard to change. I mean, I know in my generation, my mom is a wonderful, wonderful Indian mother, now Indian grandmother. But boy, she did not like the fact that I work. You know, so these things are hard to change. You know, these cultural, you know, go get your degree in international economics and public health and then stay home, right? Because that's what good Indian girls do, right, Bina? That's exactly right. So, you know, these things change slowly. And yes, women are most definitely part of the problem. You also, some of your questions have to do with what essentially are the crazy things that happen to women when they're raped, when they become widows, when they begin to menstruate. And I could talk all day about what happens to girl. The common denominator is that in many cultures, anything that you can think of that will put women or girls at a disadvantage has already been invented and is already in practice somewhere. So in many countries in Asia and Africa, when girls begin to menstruate, there are no tampons, there is no Kotex, there's a rag and you stay home and you don't go to school. You can't go to school. I would not go to school, right? Who would do that? Huge embarrassment. God forbid you get a spot. Oh my God, it's verboten. So what's the solution to that? We have to help girls have access to different products. Yeah, I'd say that's a cultural stigma, but I think the same is true in this country. So it does set girls at a disadvantage. The point is that nobody is doing something about it. It perpetuates a system that somebody has an invested interest in, whether that's a mother, a father, or a community. So that is a big issue. What happens to women and girls after they're raped? I think I don't have to tell you all the stories. Where they're stoned, they're blamed, they're the adulteress, they're thrown out of their community, their kids are taken away from them, or they're thrown out with their, it's the victim is victimized again and again and again and again. And sometimes it's women that are doing that re-victimization. Widows lose their land. In many, many countries, women literally don't have legal rights to own property without the signature of their husbands or father or son. They need a male family member to sign. So I couldn't buy a car on my own in many countries because I'd have to have my father, my son, my brother, somebody sign off on that. That's a huge bar for women. That's a huge control mechanism. So women don't own the land that they farm. And they make rational choices then. I just heard about this US project in Rwanda, and it's making me crazy. The US government, and this is good, Hillary Clinton has done a lot to integrate women farmers into programs, agriculture programs all around the world. Fantastic. We've been influencing that. We've been looking at it. So a couple days ago, I hear about this program in Rwanda where the U.S. mission there is really excited because they're going to integrate women farmers into growing this cash crop. And they're so excited about they're going to help these women make all this money and it's going to be great and we're giving women access and aren't we wonderful? Well, okay, maybe. It turns out that women don't own the land on which those cash crops are grown. Those are grown on men's land. That is a man's crop. And in many parts of Africa and Asia, there are women's crops and men's crops. Women grow things that they use for the household. Men grow things that can be used for the household but have good market value so they can make money. This is one of those crops. So, and they're going into implementation and they're beginning to wonder, why aren't women participating? We don't get it. Well, did you ask the women why that is? Those are men's crops. They don't own the land. Essentially, they're putting in more labor. They're creating more work. They have put more hours on their husband's land to help grow these cash crops, the income for which benefits their husband and not them. Because women can't own land, it's a strong disincentive for them to invest. And the mission director goes out to the field and says, well, look at all these women working in the field. Great. No, not necessarily. So I think you get my point. You need to talk to women and ask them make no assumptions that things are like they are here. The last thing I'll say, and then we can open it up and have a conversation, is I have been working for the last 20 years for our country to be a real leader on global women's issues. And when Mrs. Clinton gave her phenomenal speech at the Beijing Women's Conference, I saw the first draft of it over at the museum. It was thrilling. It was like the Declaration of Independence. It was so cool. That was a pivotal moment. I was so proud to be an American. And we've come even a long way since then. But what is happening right now is just cutting the knees off from under us. And that is, I think you all know, that the US Congress is looking at making very, very drastic cuts to many, many programs, including international aid and poverty aid. But I think what most people don't realize, and I'm sure most of you know this, is that that's less than 1% of the whole federal budget. The poverty programs are actually less than half of 1%. So it's like the tip of my fingernail. We can zero them out. It's not going to have any impact on the deficit. It's not going to have any impact on the budget. But it will, you know, you can do some good pandering around it and it can get some votes and, you know, hey, yeah, come forward. But what that means is that this country will no longer be a light and a leader for many, many, many people around the world, including women and girls, which we have. And I have never, in all the years I've been walking around in Congress, I've never had the kinds of conversations that I've had with members and their staff, where there's not only an unwillingness to, there's an unwillingness to even know the facts. There's an unwillingness to even listen to what the reality is. They've made a decision, it's done. That's not a way to govern. And the only antidote to that is you. It's not me. They need to hear from their constituents. They need to hear from the people. They need to hear from you that, no, that's not acceptable. So, if you do one thing for me after the speech, just one thing, take out some personal stationery and a nice pen, and write a handwritten note to your senator or member, and if you need to know who that is, just come on our website, click on it, put in your zip code, we'll tell you who they are. And just write, you know, dear so-and-so, my name is Mary Smith, and I just want you to know that I care about what's happening to women and girls around the world. And I'd like you to do something about it. That's all. And the neat thing about sending a personal card is that everybody these days is about email and Twitter and texting and even calling, and congressional offices are so inundated with all of that. You know, they count them by the thousand, or they weigh the stacks of paper. On this issue, they don't really hear anything, ever. So 5 or 10 letters makes a huge difference to them. It's like, wow, where did that come from? You know, I'm getting this roar from my district, and I'm talking about 10 letters. But also, the personal letters get read by the members themselves, because they don't get personal mail anymore. And I always say, like, they especially don't get personal mail from women. So you go straight to the top with a personal letter. You know, sometimes it's better to do things the old-fashioned way. So just do that one thing for me, and I'll be happy. So as our country kind of falls off this cliff in terms of our support for poor people around the world, other countries are rising up. It's not just that we're falling off. China has increased its international investment in aid 10 times over the last couple of years. Huge investments in Africa. Same with Brazil. India is starting an international aid agency, which is great. Maybe it should be like focused on home first, but I'm not going to go there. The point is that other countries, and particularly the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, the BRICS, those are the 4 to watch over the next decade, are engaging, and they could care less about women's development or women's rights or even human rights. It is not about aid to them, it's about investment. And investment doesn't have values, they'll say. That directly undercuts what the US is trying to do with the aid that it has. So when we go to a country, which our government has done, I'm proud to say as a result of the advocacy of Women Thrive, where our government has said to a country, we can't give you this aid because your country doesn't legally let women own property. So it's not about discrimination. We just don't think our money will get a good rate of return if half your population can't have access to the primary input for economic development. It's just logical. Wow, look, they changed that law overnight. So when we can have that kind of influence with our assistants, that all changes. When we're decreasing the amount of money and China is going in saying, here's $1 billion, we'll build you a port, we'll build you roads, and no strings attached. We don't care what you do. You know, governments are going to make intelligent, rational decisions. No thanks, US. Too many strings attached. So there is a great danger on the horizon if we shrink back from our global leadership at the same time as other countries are roaring forward into Africa, Central America, Asia, et cetera, and securing their interests, but they're always also securing a set of values. That comes with the package, no matter what they say. In this question on women in the workforce, women are in the workforce already. You know, one of the other myths and stereotypes that I love to blast is that there's this image that poor women in developing countries are waiting to be tapped. Are you kidding me? They are tapped out. I was really blessed to live on a subsistence farm with a woman in Burkina Faso last May. There's a whole thing on our website if you're interested in it. And she works 17 hours a day. And I literally could not keep up with her. We were up at 5, picking shea nuts, to the kitchen garden, weeding. Then we came back and made breakfast for the family. Then we tended to the animals. Then we worked on her husband's land. Then we worked on her. I mean, it's incredible. How can she be tapped more? So women are working so hard. The problem is they're in the invisible economy. They're not paid, they're not protected, their labor isn't valued, they're invisible. So from a paper perspective, when you look at the GDP, all of that is invisible. So you think, let's tap it. Yes, let's integrate it. Let's recognize it. Let's value it, but not let's tap it. That's not the right frame of mind. Because with that frame of mind, you do crazy things, like ask women to work on a new crop. How are they going to do that? Ask women to come to trainings in the evening. How are they going to do that? You know, we do crazy things when we make these assumptions. So I will stop there. I hope I've shaken up your thinking enough on women and girls. It's not as simple as it looks, but it's worth doing.
We do have time for some questions that you didn't answer, but I'm sure that we'll get to.
Didn't
No, you
answer
answered all of
questions.
those.
I think
I'm
I
saying we have
answered
more questions.
Oh, I have more.
Now we get more. No, I did it all. Let's start right here. 1 second. Get a mic. Thanks.
Is there any method of tracking? You're talking about what we've done, but is there any method of tracking that the money or the goods or whatever get where they belong? We have a terrible problem of it's never getting to the people who deserve it.
Oh, I spent a lot of my life on this topic. It is very difficult to get aid to the very poorest who need it. Because at every step of the way, there are roadblocks and disincentives and discrimination and all kinds of things are actively erected to keep the poor from accessing assistance. The way around that is to strengthen local communities, women's organizations, to know what's happening and to be able to basically stick up for themselves and what they're entitled to. And even something as simple as, and this is something that we have successfully advocated, is that whenever a US project is started in a country, it needs to be published in the newspaper. how much money it is, where it's going, what its purpose is, what geographical area it will be targeted on. Now, needless to say, the State Department and the local governments this makes them crazy, right? It could create huge diplomatic nightmare. What if we don't do it? What if Congress pulls the money? You know, whatever. But even that information for citizens, they have a right to know. And once they know that this money is there, they're empowered to make sure that they get a piece of it. And a lot of what we've been doing over the last years with Women Thrive is doing exactly that with local women's associations and communities. We go to them and we say, hey, the US government is bringing this program to your community. Look, here's what it says about how it's supposed to reach women. So you make sure that happens, we'll make sure that happens. But we can't be everywhere. We've been able to do that in 5 countries. There are 65 countries where the US has programs. We can't be everywhere. But just that level of transparency can begin to shift things around. So I'm hopeful. Yeah.
Shimi.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm a second-year Clinton school student, and I was recently in Kenya, which is home, and everyone is so excited because the Chinese have come in, and they've opened up all these roads, and they've built us a highway, which is close to where I went to primary school. And so hearing you talk about the no strings attached, and knowing that as citizens, very educated, I'm rejoicing that the Chinese are coming in and building us roads. What do you recommend we do from our part to be watchful and just not look at it as development, but know that in the long run, it might not be that good for us as a citizen from Kenya?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think the best thing to do is start asking questions. Get the press to start asking questions. That's even better. And where is the road going? Was land taken away from communities? What happened to those communities? How long are they going to be using these roads? Will they repair them? Who's going to repair them? Why does it go to certain communities? Are they going between a mining site and the port? How come there aren't roads that then go to support communities? There's an area of work that we've just started to get into, and that is influencing infrastructure projects, because there is such a thing as a gendered road. And in places where this has been able to happen, where road builders have consulted with communities, and they've consulted with both men and women separately, they've built roads that actually accommodate women's needs. So they build a wide walking lane, so they're not like walking in the traffic. There are rest stalls where they can set up market or take a rest and sell things. There are, safety kind of measures taken, so there's all kinds of different ways, but there is such a thing as a gendered road, right? I would doubt that the roads being built in Kenya have been built with any of that in mind. They've probably been built in mind with, okay, how big is the Caterpillar tractor we have to run down this road to go get those minerals? So again, and the Kenyan press is very feisty and I know that's changing, and so I don't mean to say get yourself in trouble, but I think it is your right and your obligation as a citizen to just be asking the questions. There's also a lot of land grabbing going on in Kenya, so, and some of that stuff is, the road is visible. The land grabs are not so visible.
Trish.
Yes.
Hi, thanks so much for being here today. I'm a student at the Clinton School as well. I just want to thank you for your message, because I think it explains a lot of where is our money going, why isn't this working, and why are women still hundreds of years behind, or communities and countries. But my question for you is, what do you think, or what's your perspective about sort of when we look at educational programs for girls, as long as we're spending all the money and we're building this infrastructure to get that access to education for them, making more giant leaps as far as getting them access to technology, rather than basic books, but actually bringing them into the modern age?
Yeah, great, excellent question. So a couple of things you should know about education. One is that in the last 10 years, because of the Millennium Development Goal on primary school education, millions and millions and millions of girls are getting registered for school. The problem is those girls don't necessarily show up on the second day of school. You know, what gets measured is what gets done. And also what gets measured is what gets gained also, in that countries are registering girls between 2 and 8 for primary school just to get the ratios right, and those girls, of course, never go to school. What we should be measuring is what are kids learning. Are they learning? It's complicated. We don't even necessarily have it right in this country, but that's what we need to be measuring. So I'd say that's kind of the first point on education. In terms of, you know, building all the infrastructure and all of that and technology, one of the reasons that kids are not learning, but especially girls, and when you look at the statistics on learning, you know, boys are not doing well, but girls are much farther behind. And that's because of the cultural discrimination and teachers focusing more on boys than girls. When girls go home, they have to do their chores first, and then their studies. By the time they get to their studies, it's dark. They don't have flashlights, they don't have light, they can't. So there's lots of things that are stacked against girls. But technology, if you can get it into girls' hands, is neutral, right? In the sense that a girl with a cell phone can learn. The cell phone isn't prejudice, right? She can learn as much as the boy. And there's some really amazing technologies out there in terms of these little tiny, these computers that are interactive with kids and teach them reading and all kinds of things. It's really amazing, the stuff that people are coming up with. I'm a big proponent of that, as long as the distribution is equal. And that's a hard thing to get to. You know, technology is valuable. So they may share it with the boys can take it home, but the girls can't. Right? The girls get it for an hour, the boys get it for 3 hours. So you have to overcome at some point that cultural discrimination, but I think technology can help even the playing field. One of the really disturbing trends in terms of technology and women is that some countries have begun to catch on that technology in women's hands is really very, very powerful for all kinds of reasons. And maybe it's not such a good idea for women and girls to have technology. So we saw in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, there were some provincial kind of lords, whatever you'd call them, warlords, who were beginning to say, any woman with a cell phone will be shot. You know, any girl with access to any, you know, they don't want women to have technology, because it is powerful. And luckily, thank you, Secretary Clinton, the Office of Women and Girls Initiatives at the State Department was all over it, and I think helped kind of just shut that down and not even let it start happening or spreading. But there are a lot of elements out there that want to ban women's access to technology. It's scary. Yes.
Right here.
Oh, sorry. And then there.
Thank you for coming. I'm a former student here, and I think that the message of equality among women and men is well received in a culture like this, in a society where people even realize the importance of that. My question was about societies, communities where the women and the girls themselves don't even realize that they have a right to develop or to own anything. I'm from Uganda, and every time I go back home in the village, even as well informed as I am, I find myself conforming to the culture that there is. And I kick myself all the time I come back for not saying something. So how do you break beyond those cultural norms that prevent the women? How do you begin to educate the women, to educate the men about the importance of just supporting women and girls to develop?
Great, wonderful question. And you shouldn't feel bad about conforming. You should see what happens to me when I put on a sari. I'm like, totally different person. I mean, besides the fact that you can't really walk properly, but don't feel bad about it. You know, it's hard and it's natural. I think where the solution is that it needs to be more than one, right? It needs to be more than one. Once you get 2, 3, 4, 5 women together who begin talking, it's easier to stand up. And educating both men and women in the community, maybe separately, but both, about basic human rights. You know, in the World Health Organization survey that was done on violence globally, they did ask women, under what circumstances is your husband, is it acceptable for your husband to beat you? When I burn the food, 83% of women said that. If I go out alone, 90% of women said that's acceptable. I mean, these huge, where women have internalized the system and they believe their husband has the right to beat them under certain circumstances. Changing that requires a lot of education. You know, letting women know that there in fact is a universal declaration of human rights, that there are laws in their countries that prevent this. So beginning with basic information and basic knowledge, and there's a lot of wonderful organizations in Uganda that are doing that kind of work, that community level education, doing street theater with men also, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with them. Lots of really wonderful, Uganda's a very vibrant place in this regard. So again, it's really starting where people are and just, you know, beginning to let women know that they actually have some rights. So.
I know it's a big question, and I don't mean it trivially, but what are men so afraid of?
I don't know. What are you guys so afraid of?
No, but I mean, why does a woman with rights scare a whole, you know, why is it so scary to men for women to have rights?
Yes, thank you.
It's just one word, it's power.
Well, say more what you mean by that. What does that look like?
Well, in from every standpoint, it's a matter of in your local setting, in your community, in your family. You know, it's what's kind of running the world today, and everybody aspires to having more and more power. And if you can begin with it in your local level, it feels good.
Mm-hmm. Yes, next to you.
I think more than that too, it's change. Like if you're comfortable with the way things are, like if that's the way things have always been, then anything that shakes that up, anything that changes that at all is going to be threatening. I mean, especially if it's a threat to control or like the way you've been able to run your family or your you know, your household or your community for that amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Angie, do you want to comment on that?
No, please do. This is the best part.
I just want to sort of build on what they're saying. I think that works both ways as well. If a well-meaning or well-intentioned man is willing to relinquish some power and some control and to change, I think often women that are in that situation or in a relationship with that man, however it maybe also fear that change or can fear that change, and men get pushed back from that as well. Mm-hmm. So it's not quite as simple as just the man needing to change as well. So I just want to add that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's complicated.
You had a question, yes ma'am.
Hi, I'm a student at Little Rock Central High, and I was wondering what my generation can do to empower women and girls all over the world, and while we're young and in the future as well.
To be honest, I think that your generation is the generation that's going to transform all of this. I just don't have any question about that. So keep on going. And, you know, kids your age, I shouldn't call them kids, young adults your age, that I talk to all over the world, particularly boys, they sort of don't have the same stuff going on in their heads about women and girls. Maybe they had a strong mother, maybe, you know, who knows what influenced them. But there's so much of, you know, God, just let us get into power and we're going to just change everything. I really believe that's true. I think probably the most important thing you can do is be true to yourself, right? Demand to be treated well by the men or boys in your life. That is the most transformative thing that you can do to change your generation.
Yeah, in the back. Yes.
Well, it's interesting because I'm a teacher at Little Rock Central High School, and I'm a teacher.
Interesting.
Yeah. And my question is almost the opposite of hers. And it's, what do I do about the apathetic girls? She and the other girls who are here today should be triple this amount. And we're finding in a club that we have at Central, we can't get girls excited about being empowered. So what do we do about that apathy? And then I have another question that's totally probably inappropriate, but in those blinders that you see in the Congress, is it partisan? And just wondering about that.
Oh, you kind of just took the wind out of my sails on that other point. I think it's true. Again, I can't answer that question. I'm not of that generation. I do know from my generation, I'm sort of an X, Y, kind of cusp. There is this feeling of sort of, we have that. We got that done. It's all good. It's covered. I'm a girl. I can do whatever I want. I'm never going to run into these barriers. And then a friend is date raped. Or then something else happens. Your friend gets a waitressing job and she has to wear a tight shirt. And I think that all you can do at this point is raise awareness with girls about how they should be treated, what they should expect, right? And at some point in their lives, they'll need to put that into practice. There's a whole bunch of really fantastic girl power books that are kind of addressed to the 12, 13, 14 kind of tween generation, and they're all about this, right? And they're entertaining and they're interesting, and they talk about how to kiss boys. Everybody's going to read them, but they really get to this question of start with what girls really want to know and what they're thirsty for, but also start to transfer some of this. It's wrong, for a boy to do this. It's wrong for an employer to do this. So that would be my only idea, but I would engage the girls at your school in that question. I would imagine they just have lots of fascinating answers, but that's the best I can come up with.
We have time for one more right here.
Oh, and you asked about partisanship. Women Thrive is a 501c3 nonpartisan organization.
Okay, it's all well what you've said, but what do you do about the media, Hollywood, the ad companies that empower women, but they're empowering them only with their sexuality? You look on TV, little girls today want to be sexy. What are we doing to combat that? I don't mean just, of course we teach our children the right things, but what can we do to change Hollywood, television, and especially the print, to empower girls in the right way, not using their sexuality?
Yeah, that's above my pay grade. I don't know that I can answer that question. But I do think there's an interesting generational shift going on with my generation, certainly, and definitely with the next generation. And it is this. Women's sexuality is a powerful thing, and we should embrace that. Part of why we have this schizophrenia in the media is because we shut it down or we go to the other extreme, right? I think the solution is in embracing it in a healthy way and not telling our teenage daughters not to be sexy, but to explore their sexuality in appropriate ways and how to integrate it rather than saying, don't wear that mini skirt, or don't do that. And I think in that shift, we can begin to help kids. And I think the best outcome is that people go into the world with a healthy sense of sexuality rather than a fear of it, rather than all kinds of crazy stuff happens when you suppress that. And again, the media is going to spew out what they're going to spew out. But we're still our children's parents. right? It's our job to help them interpret and navigate the world. That's my personal opinion. So, yeah, I wish the media would stop doing it, but until then, I have to help my kids navigate this world that I brought them into, and for better or worse, that's what there is. So that's where I would leave it.
Ritu, thank you so much for coming and visiting
Yes,
us for the second
thank you.
time.